My mission in life is to give power to the people, insert Bane voice. Because once you have and you taste that sense of true freedom, what would happen to the world if all of a sudden there was a small army of individuals who are benevolent leaders and who are willing to go out there and share this information too? You live a life of legacy.
Welcome to the Contrarian Capitalist Podcast, the ultimate destination for accredited investors and entrepreneurs seeking alternative wealth building strategies. Discover how to fast track your journey to wealth and time freedom by thinking outside the box. If you're ready to join the ranks of the Contrarian Capitalists and learn the most effective ways to reach your financial goals faster, you're in the right place. Let's get started with today's episode of the Contrarian Capitalist Podcast.
Hello, everybody. This is Sylvania Harrod, and thank you very much for listening to this first episode of the Contrarian Capitalist Podcast. I wanted to take some time through this episode to introduce why in the world would you want to listen to this, as well as what is my intention for those that do listen to this. So before I get into that, I'll just give you a little background about myself. Over the last roughly 20 years, I have had this curious question that I've asked myself every single day, which is, what is it that makes people do what they do? And so for myself, I ask myself the question, I ask other friends the question, and when I really think about it, it comes down to a couple core principles that I operate off of pretty much every single day, which is one, who am I? Two, what do I choose to show up in the world today? And three, why does any of that matter? And so just to give you a little background, so I spent roughly about 16 years in the enterprise tech sales world. And prior to that was in the US military as a mental health specialist. So you'll hear me talk about a couple things, and a lot of terms will have military terms, as well as some of the things I've learned from spending lots of days around engineers, CEOs, executives. The beautiful thing about that 16-year career is that I had the privilege of speaking to over 30,000 different companies. And one of the things that I learned very early on is that the best way to understand what a company does is understand how it generates cash flow. And so through that experience, I was able to spend time just learning about these big companies, really, really big companies. So you can think of some of the most famous US companies, in one way or fashion, I was able to sell with them and work with different departments, work with different leaders, different business units across the board. And what that did is that gave me just a very good understanding of how US businesses work today. And so in my last stop, I had the privilege of working with companies that were primarily owned by this world called private equity. And so when I got to understand the basis of private equity, it legitimately blew my mind. Remember, I talked about like how do things work, and that little sense of curiosity happened to be there. And so I was dumbfounded because I had mainly spent my time with enterprise companies. And I thought when you think of the Fortune 500, you go, oh, cool. You know of the famous CEOs that be out there. We have biographies based upon them. We can look at the Elon Musk of the world, the Steve Jobs, the Bob Igers. And it's fascinating because you go, oh man, these guys are doing billions upon billions of dollars. But then when I got to understand that those companies are such a small microcosm in what ends up occurring in capitalism today, especially in the US economy. And so when I really started to understand that, hang on, the CEOs really aren't in charge. They're there to cast the vision, but it's the boards that are driving that. And then I started looking like, who's sitting on these boards? Who are some of the largest shareholders? I'm studying 10Qs of these publicly traded companies. And that's when I realized, holy smokes, 88% of the companies that are in the Fortune 500 are owned primarily by three companies. And I went and I was like, excuse me, 88%? And then you start realizing, holy smokes, who's the one who's actually pulling the strings? In sales, we always said, if a person's asking you a question, what is the question behind their question? Because if you get to that place, all of a sudden magic can really happen. So I started looking at that, and that's when I realized private equity happened to be there. And so I had a mentor many years ago who told me the goal is to get good enough at understanding businesses that you can begin to start playing in the larger game of private equity, because the world of private equity has unlimited opportunities. And so when I look at that space and I look at what was going on through that journey, I realized, okay, this is a game that I choose to play. And so in another episode, I'll teach you about the four questions I ask myself. But I'll stay on course a little bit because I can run a little bit when it comes to these different moments and conversations to be there, because ADHD likes to have a little bit of a party. But I start understanding these beautiful companies, things that are running. And there's a couple things that I know about myself. I love business. I love learning how things work because I'm naturally curious. And so understanding how they work, and you can use this quote of follow the money. If you follow the money, you can realize how things are really driven. And so that led me to the place of wanting to really understand what are the things that billionaires do that the everyday average person doesn't do. Through my military career, working with a lot of special operators, I learned in order to do something you've never done, you have to become somebody you've never been, which is why they're so unique in their tactics and how they execute things, because they're not going to follow the trends. They're going to go against that. And that's why when I look at myself, I'm naturally a contrarian. So if you're listening to this episode to be able to be there, you've gotten to this point because you are a contrarian yourself. You don't like following the trends. You don't like following the status quo. You like to go and see when everybody's running in one direction, you go the opposite way. And the beautiful thing about being a father is that I have four beautiful children, and every single one of them is completely different. We're designed a particular way. Where our opportunity is to really discover why we were designed the way we were. And the moment that you discover that piece and you discover how you can be able to execute using those tools that you currently have, that's when the magic happens. So, how does this relate to capitalism? Well, I told you, through those journeys, I thought the CEOs were in charge. Then I started figuring out the boards. Then I started figuring out, holy smokes, if you think about the largest growth engine in the US economy is the small and medium business. And here's the interesting thing, over 90% of them are owned by private equity. You have some people that go around to be able to be there. So I'm looking, I was like, okay, big business is owned by this, small business is owned by private equity. What in the world is this world of private equity? What does this happen to be? And so that led me further down the journey of chasing that rabbit, Alice in Wonderland. And as I went to start chasing that rabbit and being able to go through there, I said, this is the game that I was called to play in, because I like looking at unconventional things. I'm not going to be the person that wants to sit in a cubicle for 40 years to one day when my health has already declined, take off and start doing the things I want to do. So the other beautiful piece that I realized when I was building this community is that you're probably the same way. Deep down inside, if you can't find that desire to want to push harder and wake up and want to jump out of your bed, it's probably because there's a little voice inside of you that has a different desire, has a different thing that it wants to be able to do, and you just haven't been able to feed it yet. So let's look at that place, right? Let's chase that rabbit. If you're the kind of person that's like, I want to play the actual game and not the game that I think I'm supposed to be doing, welcome to the show. That's what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to be interviewing people in this world of alternative investments. Traditional investments is okay, you go ahead, you get a 401k, you get a self-directed IRA, You play the popularity contest that's called the stock market. You go through that process. And as you go through that, one day, maybe in 40 years, you're going to go ahead and you're going to be able to retire. And then all this money that you were putting in and putting away and being able to do things, you can finally live your life. I say, screw that. Why not start that instead of waiting 40 years? Why can't we do that in the next 3 to 5 years? Because that's all it really is. And the reason why I know that to be true is because that is my reality. It was roughly about 8 years ago. I remember having this moment where I woke up and I go, I think I want to do something different. I want to build something that allows me the opportunity to, in all honesty, I just wanted to be able to buy a Tesla and my wife not yell at me because I had other cash flow that happened to be there. What are some cash producing assets I can be? One, you can build a business. You can buy a business. You can do other things. So I started in the world of building a business. So I built this business. It grew up, and in less than 4 hours a week, I was generating a few $1 million consistently over the course of 5 years. It was great because what it did is it gave me the most powerful thing you can ever have, which is a freedom unlocked button, where you hear me reference it as your FU button. When you have an FU button, you get to pick where you choose to work because you're not reliant on what you're doing. Because you're not reliant on who's going to be your boss, what do they tell you do you need to be able to do, any of that nonsense. You don't have to do that anymore. You get to pick the rules. Because the reality is, if you're listening to this, you love freedom. That's your North Star. You like the freedom of choice, the freedom of choose. You work because you want to, not because you have to. And you can go ahead and live in the neighborhood that you want to because you've already built something for yourself. You can consistently do that. And from that experience, that allows you to go ahead and keep building and building and building. And I'm going to tell you, the moment you taste freedom, you're going to want more of it. And you want to consistently grow. So it doesn't matter if you're working at a job or, unfortunately, you built a business that ends up becoming a job because now you're stuck. You can't really go anywhere. You probably didn't build it to a place where you can scale it properly. If you are scaling it, can you sell? Probably not, because nobody ever told you how to build it in the first place. So through that experience, I was able to experience freedom. We were able to buy our dream home. We were able to go ahead and take the vacations, take the trips, let the kids play in the sports leagues they want to without even thinking about, okay, what happens to cost? You just go do those things because of alternative investments. Because what I realized is that it's as much easier for me to buy a business than it is to build it. Two different breeds of people. Some people are hunters. They're designed to build from ground up. Some people are farmers. They do an amazing job when the car's already in motion. Depends on who you are. You'll hear me talk a lot about your own personality because I'm not here to tell you what to do. As Tony Robbins said in one of his specials, I am not your guru. You want to know why? Because I'm consistently growing as much as you are. You're going to learn the things that I'm going to grow. Heck, in 2 years, some of my belief systems may be different. It's a good thing. If I'm the same person at 40 that I was at 30, I'm not living a life worth living. And so if you're sitting there and you're watching this, you probably have the same desires. And I'm here to tell you there's a couple things. And here's the main thing I want to drive home is that there's two things you need to learn. One, learn the rules to the game. Not the game you want it to be, but the actual game that it is. And number two, look back at rule number one, which is if you learn to understand the rules of the game, you can start playing it properly. Why in the world was a 401k created? It was created as a way to help build somebody else's fund so that they can go ahead and buy different assets and they're willing to give you whatever possible returns they're able to get on a smaller side when the house consistently wins. Because you'll also hear me talk about in another episode the art of OPM, which is other people's money. you start using other people's money, the game begins to change. Like I love sitting there and watching the Dave Ramseys of the world who talk to undisciplined people. That's great. They're undisciplined. They need those kind of structures to be able to be there. If not, this world would be entire chaos. But for those of us that are already disciplined and we already have that, we don't care about the flashy thing to be able to go there unless it's a passion of yours. If you have it, it's because you're driven from passion. You're not driven just because I need somebody else to validate who I am. So I've always been a person that's based upon transparency. And so what I will do is tell you what I do know. What I won't do is try to pretend to tell you things that I don't know. Because that's when I'll bring in other experts. That's when I'll bring in other people who live that life, who live, eat, and breathe that topic. And so this is also a partnership. It's a two-way communication channel because I'm going to tell you what I know from my experience, but I also love feedback. I love it when somebody says, I really would like to learn about this topic because what it does is it forces me to either explain it to you or find an individual who does do that. So the core credence of this is that we are going to use the strategies that are the most effective. Because in my life, it's binary. It's either something is effective or something is ineffective. And so if it's something effective, it's because it's been used over time. It's a principle. It can keep working. And when I look at these different tactics, you got to look at it. Billionaires, do most billionaires put their money in the public markets? Mm-mm. Anybody with super high net worth, which is considered over 50 million, according to most financial institutions, typically it's not going to be in public markets. Where they end up putting their money and getting ridiculous returns is this world of private equity and private capital. And so as an accredited investor, my job and your job is to, while we have other things going on in life, we got families, we got kids, we got careers, we have other things going on. How can we make sure we're consistently playing a winning game? A game that is going to be effective, that we're playing by the same rules, because all you need in life is information and access. Once you get that, then you can really dance. So I know that I said a lot of words about who I am, but you'll also hear me reference throughout multiple conversations my love for gorillas. And so you'll hear gorilla puns, you'll hear military puns, those kind of things. That's just our shared language and our shared truths. Because the thing I love about gorillas is gorillas are the strongest animal in the jungle, in the kingdom. But they don't need to let people know that they're the strongest ones. They just are. They're based upon family. They have values. They have a family system that they operate on, which is the lead gorilla being a silverback. After a certain age, they turn silver and they have an alpha and they have an omega. So in this current journey, I'm going to reference myself as your favorite silverback. And so you'll hear me talk about those type of topics because gorillas also signify wisdom. They signify community. And I believe that through this journey, I'm going to embark my wisdom onto you. I'm also going to invite people onto here that will embark their wisdom of what they know to be true, and not just because they've done it for 2 weeks. These are individuals that have experience. We're talking about 15, 20 years of doing the thing where they can tell you the good, bad, ugly, and share the truths of where you should be spending your time. Because if you want to play a winner's game, you first have to get into the game. And so that's where you hear me talk about certain vehicles that are there, whether it's on the mergers and acquisition side, whether it's on the real estate side, whether it's on the fund side. And if you don't know any of those things, trust me, I'll make sure that I explain it and go through it in future episodes. My mission in life is to give power to the people, insert Bain voice. Because once you have and you taste that sense of true freedom, what would happen to the world if all of a sudden there was a small army of individuals who are benevolent leaders and who are willing to go out there and share this information too? You live a life of legacy. And here's the thing, you don't have to wait till you're 70, 80 years old to execute on legacy. you can start on that now. And everybody that's going to come in your stratosphere is going to do the same thing. And they'll be like, ooh, that boy got something different. And that's because that's who you are. That's who you were designed to be. So fellow contrarians, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be your favorite silverback. And I hope you enjoy some of the future episodes. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Contrarian Capitalist Podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback helps us reach more people ready to explore contrarian investment strategies. Stay connected with us on social media for more expert insights, behind-the-scenes content, and updates on upcoming episodes. You can find all the links in the show notes. Until next time, stay bold, think differently, and keep pursuing the legacy you deserve. Thanks for listening to the Contrarian Capitalist Podcast.